and dividing integers. Let's study the multiplications below and use the patterns that exist for the answers to complete the answers that are missing. So the positive signs are not written in front of values, but they have been included to try and help clarify the pattern. So they're not usually written, but they're here to show you that clarification. So 2 times 3 is 6. 2 times 2 is 4. 2 times 1 is 2. And 2 times 0 is 0. So up until now, this is what we're used to. We're going to use our calculator to calculate 2 times -1. So that gives us -2. 2 times -2 gives us -4. And 2 times -3 gives us -6. So you might notice a pattern for this first set of multiplications. Let's see if that pattern stays for the second set. 5 times 3 is 15, 5 times 2 is 10, 5 times 1 is 5, and 5 times 0 is 0. 5 times -1, again, use your calculator, will give us -5. 5 times -2 is -10, and 5 times -3 is -15. So you'll notice when we multiplied two positive values together, they gave us a positive value. When we multiplied by 0, it gave us 0. And when we multiplied a positive value by a negative value, it gave us a negative value for both of these sets of multiplications. So let's see if that same pattern stays for the last set. 8 times 3 is 24. 8 times 2 is 16. 8 times 1 is 8. 8 times 0 is 0. 8 times -1 is -8. 8 times -2 is -16. And 8 times -3 equals -24. So indeed, the same pattern happened with our third set of integers that we're multiplying. So let's come up with a rule. So when multiplying a positive value with a negative value, the answer will always be negative. So sometimes you might see that listed with those positive and negative integer markers, where we might show that a positive value multiplied by a negative value equals a negative amount. Now, the great thing about multiplication is that order doesn't matter. So you could rearrange the negative and the positive. So you could have the negative value first and the positive value first, and you're still going to get a negative value. So let's see how that works in the next set of rules. So what happens when we switch that, though? So we have -2 times 3, which was -6. -2 times 2, which is -4. -2 times 1, which was -2. And -2 times 0, which is 0. Now what happens if I multiply two negative numbers together? So -2 times -1, if I calculate that using my calculator, I get +2. Or I'm just going to write it as 2. -2 times -2 will give us +4. And -2 times -6 gives us +6. Let's see if that same pattern exists. You might notice a pattern for the second set. -5 times 3 is -15. -5 times 2 is -10. -5 times 1 is -5, and -5 times 0 is 0. But what happens when we multiply two negative numbers together? Well, -5 times -1, if I enter those in my calculator, will give me +5. -5 times -2 will give me positive 10. And negative 5 times negative 3 gives me positive 15. Interesting. All right, so we might be able to say that two negative numbers multiplied together will give us a positive number. Let's just make sure that it stays true for this last set. Negative 8 times negative 8 times positive 3 is negative 24. Negative 8 times 2 is negative 16. Negative 8 times 1 is negative 8. And negative 8 times 0 is 0. Again, we can use our calculator initially. So negative 8 times negative 1 equals 8. And negative 8 times 16 gives us positive 16. So indeed, we can say with certainty that when multiplying two negative values, the answer is always positive. And again, you may wish to use the integer markers to help you represent that. So a negative number times a negative number will equal a positive number. So we can represent multiplication in a couple of different ways. So whenever a number is written in front of a bracket, a multiplication sign is understood to be between the number and the bracket. So in the examples in the above, we use those multiplication symbols. You could also express it as just 4 bracket negative 6, and that actually means 4 times negative 6. And we know that a positive and a negative integer will be a negative value, and 4 times 6 is 24. We can also express them both in brackets. So negative 6 times 5 really means negative 6 times 5. So we're using that multiplication symbol. And again, we know that in positive and a negative, and it doesn't matter which order they are, is going to give us a negative value. And 6 times 5 is 30. So understand that if there is no sign in between a number and a bracket or two brackets, that it means multiplication. You might also see multiplication expressed using a dot as well. When we get into algebra, we'll avoid the use of the X as a multiplication symbol because X is often used as a letter, and we don't want to confuse the multiplication symbol with a variable. So understanding that we can write our multiplication in these ways will help us eliminate that issue. Now, division follows the same rules as multiplication. So if I want to think about writing this as my integer markers, a positive value and a positive value, if I divide those, so a positive number divided by a positive number equals a positive number. We already know that. That's what we've been doing probably since elementary school. We've dealt with just positive integers. But if we have a positive value and a negative value, and I divide those, so a positive number divided by a negative number will give me a negative answer. The same thing happens if I switch these positive and negatives. So if I make my negative integer first and my positive integer second, the negative divided by a positive value will still give me that negative value. And lastly, if I have two negative numbers and I go ahead and divide those, my final answer will be a positive value. So the same rules apply for multiplication as they do for division. So if they are the same sign, so two positive values or two negative values, the final answer will be a positive value. And if they are different signs, then they are going to be a negative value. Let's go through some more examples. So just to recap, When multiplying or dividing two integers with the same sign, the answer is positive. And when multiplying or dividing two integers with different signs, the answer is negative. Part A says we need to multiply positive 8 times negative 4. So these are different signs, so the answer is going to be negative, and 8 times 4 is 32. For part B, negative 7 times positive 2, it's one of each, so it's a negative answer, and 7 times 2 is 14. For part C, I'm multiplying negative 6 by negative 3. They both have the same sign, so my final answer is going to be a positive value, and 6 times 3 is 18. Now, what happens when I have more than one or more than two items or terms or numbers that I'm multiplying together? Well, I'm going to start by doing this in order of operations. So I'm going to do my first two first. So 2 times negative 5, the answer will be negative, and 2 times 5 is 10, because this was one of each. And I'm multiplying this by negative 4. So this time I have a negative, and my answer will be positive, and 10 times 4 is 40. So you're just going to work your way across from left to right using order of operations. For part E, I have a negative number divided by a positive number, so my final answer will be negative because my signs are different. 42 divided by 6 is 8. Sorry, is 7. My bad. And lastly, in this row, I have a negative 36 divided by negative 4. So those two negatives might show that my final answer will be a positive value. And 36 divided by 4 is 9. What happens when I have, again, multiple operations in one equation? Well, I need to follow order of operations. So 8 times negative 5, so that's a positive times a negative, which is a negative, and 8 times 5 is 40. And I'm dividing by negative 2. So I have a negative divided by a negative, so my final answer will be a positive, and 40 divided by 2 is 20. For fractions, you want to simplify what you have on the numerator and what you might have on the denominator before you do your division. So for the numerator, I have negative 366 times negative 8. So my numerator will be a positive value. And 366 times 8 gives us 2,928. And my denominator is still negative 416. Now I'm going to divide these two values. So remember, a fraction means the same as division, and I have a positive number divided by a negative number, so my answer will be negative, and I have 2,928 divided by 416 is approximately negative 7.04 if I round to the nearest hundredths. Now, what happens when we deal with powers or exponents? So what does it mean when I'm taking negative 5 squared? Well, that means that I'm taking negative 5 and I'm multiplying it by itself 2 times. So that's what a squared symbol means. So I'm taking that number, or that base, and I'm multiplying by itself 2 times. So negative times a negative is a positive, and 5 times 5 is 25. What does negative 2 to the power of 3 mean? Well, this means it's negative 2 times itself 3 times. So in order to answer this question, I'm going to follow order of operations. I'm going to do my calculations. These are all multiplications from left to right. Negative 2 times negative 2, so 2 negatives make a positive, and 2 times 2 is 4. So 4 times negative 2, a positive and a negative is a negative, and 4 times 2 is 8. And lastly, what does it mean when I have negative 3 to the exponent of 4? Well, this means that I'm taking negative 3 times negative 3 times negative 3 times negative 3. So I'm multiplying negative 3 by itself 4 times. So please don't think that this means negative 3 times 4. It's negative 3 times itself 4 times. So again, I'm just going to follow order of operations, going from left to right. Negative 3 times negative 3, that's 2 negatives make a positive, so 3 times 3 is 9, times negative 3 times negative 3. Negative 3 times 9, so this is going to give us a negative value. One's a positive, one's a negative. 9 times 3 is negative 27, and I'm multiplying that by another negative 3. A negative times a negative gives us a positive value, and 27 times 3 gives us 81. If you have any questions about this lesson, please reach out to me, send me an email, or sign up for a virtual help session, and I will see you in the next lesson.